Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Spring Steinbeck Fellows reading. My name is Nick Taylor. I'm the director of the Center for Steinbeck Studies. And I am here to welcome you to hear the work of 3 of our 2020-2021 Steinbeck Fellows. The Steinbeck Fellows program was started 21 years ago by Professor Martha Heasley Cox, who taught at San Jose State for many years and wanted to create a fellowship program that would support writing projects by writers who could benefit from the kind of support that Steinbeck's father showed him in his early years before he had any success at all from writing. His father gave him an allowance, and it made all the difference for him. And Professor Cox wanted to do the same for other writers. And when she passed away a few years ago, we were able to expand the program to 6 fellows a year. Currently, the fellows receive a $15,000 stipend, and hopefully that allows them more time to write and to finish the projects that they're working on. This has been a year like no other that we've ever had in the Steinbeck Fellows program for many reasons, most of them bad. One is that I've never met these people in person. And we were just talking before we started about making plans to meet in person when everything is back to normal. And that's something that we absolutely want to do. Usually we meet in the Steinbeck Center on the 5th floor of Martin Luther King Library, which has not been open for over a year. And there aren't really any plans to open it in the near future until we get COVID under control. And the other reason this has been a horrible year is that one of the 6 Steinbeck Fellows from this year passed away last December. Anthony Viasna-So read in this forum at the last Steinbeck Fellows reading, and it ended up being his last reading. And we're going to miss him tremendously and celebrate him and his career and his incredible work when his book comes out in August. I've been in touch with his partner, and he's going to come and read from Anthony's book, and we're really looking forward to that. So there has been some good news, which is that we have named 6 new Steinbeck Fellows for next year. And we're very, very excited about them. I wanted to share their names with you if I can't actually share them in person. Ariel Chu, Rose Himber Howes, Tammy Hee-Jae Lee, Uche Okonkwo, Timea Sipos, and Brian Trapp. And for the fall semester at least, and possibly the whole year, it's going to be looking a little bit like this again next year. But I feel like we're accumulating a roster of people we can't wait to meet in person. And we now have 6 more names on that list. So I encourage you all to come back in the fall and hear the work of the 6 new Steinbeck Fellows. All right, the way we're going to do this is the 3 fellows will take turns reading. And if you have any questions for them, feel free at any time to just put them in the chat, before you forget them. And we'll read them and answer them at the end of the reading program. And we should be able to get through a good number of them. You can also just raise your hand at the end of the reading, and we'll call on you and take your questions. All right, so the first reading tonight will be by Rita Chang-Eppig, who received her MFA from NYU. Her stories have appeared in McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Virginia Quarterly Review, Clark's World, Santa Monica Review, Conjunctions, and elsewhere. She has received fellowships from the Rona Jaffe Foundation at Vermont Studio Center and the Writers Grotto, and she is working on her first novel. Please join me in welcoming Rita Chang-Eppig.
Hi, sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. Thank you, Nick, for that introduction. And I just want to piggyback off what Nick just said about supporting Anthony Villasmasol's loved ones by buying a copy of his book After Parties when it comes out in August. He's really such an incredible short story writer, and so his loss was a huge loss to the literary community. So I just wanted to put that out there. For my reading today, I am going to be reading a little bit from my novel in progress, which is based on the life of the woman who commanded the largest pirate fleet in China during the Qing dynasty. Basically, according to some historical accounts, she was this peasant girl who was kidnapped by pirates and sold to a brothel. And while she was at the brothel, she met the commander of this very large pirate fleet, who was impressed by her negotiation skills and her shrewdness. So they got married, and then he gave her command over half of his fleet. And then later, when he died, she took over the entire operation. So she commanded the largest naval force in China in the early 1800s. So anyway, so the only names you really need to know for this section are Shi Young, so she's the main character, Zhang Yi is her husband, and Ren Ren is the name of her best friend on the ship. The boy arrived 3 weeks earlier than expected, impatient to lay claim to the dominion of his forefathers. The plan had been for the ship to dock in Canton the following week so that Shi Young could settle into the Zhang estate, where the midwife and the bevy of aunties, all of whom had children of their own, awaited to help her through her first birth. But heaven laughs at the certainty of mortals, so the contractions started while they were still a whole day away from shore, amid a thunderstorm. At some point during the fourth or fifth set of contractions, Shi Young experienced a sudden clarity. She saw all the branching paths leading up to the present moment, saw how she had chosen all the wrong branches along the way. There was that older boy from her village who'd wanted to marry her, but she never could look past his dull wit and sharp back hump. There was the decision to work on the same boat as her father and brother instead of, as the aunties had exhorted, selling fish in the marketplace. Then, of course, there was the decision to join Zhang Yi's fleet. Maybe she should have tried harder to talk her way out of it. She was good at talking, after all. She might have coaxed Zhang Yi into a compromise, one that would not have resulted in her being here, now, about to give birth on a violently lurching ship to a child she wasn't entirely sure she wanted. Maybe this was heaven's punishment for her, a woman who dared to want more than the fate that heaven usually allotted women. "Where is Zhang Yi?" she yelled at Ren Ren, who was crying panic tears because she'd never witnessed a childbirth prior to this. Freezing seawater sloshed from a pail onto Shi Young's blanket, which was already soaked through with sweat and birthing fluids, a slimy yet sturdy tangle around her like kelp dragging her to the seafloor. One of the men popped his head through the cabin door. "Big Brother Zhang is coming. His ship is close, but they're having trouble getting closer in this storm." Feng Yun angrily waved him away, telling him to give the women folk some goddamn privacy. The women folk in question consisted of Shi Young, Ren Ren, and Feng Yun, who had a daughter of her own and therefore at least had a sense of what needed to happen going forward. "You need to breathe," Feng Yun said, but Shi Young wasn't doing very well at this basic task. She tried again, dragging the air into her lungs, feeling it claw her insides on its way down like a recalcitrant cat. She pushed. Ren Ren gripped her hand as tightly as Shi Young was probably gripping hers back. Suddenly the girl cried, I see it, and then she said, "Oh." "What?" Shi Young said. "Stop pushing," Feng Yun said. "The baby's feet are coming out first. We need to turn it." "Turn it?" "I saw a midwife do this once," Feng Yun said. She splayed her hands on Shi Young's belly and pushed on it at an angle, as if kneading dough. This she repeated a second time, and then a fourth and a 10th. Finally, she said, "I think it's too late. The baby's going to have to come out feet first." "Can it do that?" Ren Ren asked. "Maybe if we tried a different position," Feng Yun said. She and Renren helped Shi Young shift onto her hands and knees. Mazu, Mazu, Shi Young prayed. I'm sorry for everything I've ever done. I promise I'll make better decisions from now on. Just don't let it end this way. The legs are out, Feng Ying said. You're almost there. Feng Ying and Renren shouted the name of each newly visible body part with an enthusiasm Shi Young would have found comical had she not been in so much pain. At last, she felt the child shrug free of her as if she were a coat that he no longer needed. She collapsed onto her elbows, the side of her face scraped against rough deck. Hands turned her so that she was once more lying on her back. Feng Ying placed the baby in her arms. A boy, just as both the fortune teller and midwife had predicted. She gazed at his vaguely pointy head, his wrinkled brow and tiny folded limbs, and, overcome by a feeling of love, or was it revulsion, she picked up the knife at her bedside, unsheathed it, and cut herself free of him. Zheng Yi arrived later that night. He found her and Renren in her cabin. Feng Ying had retired to her own quarters, and Renren had fallen asleep by Shi Young's feet, spilled out in all directions. Zheng Yi nudged her awake, and she, too, returned to her quarters. Behind Zheng Yi, Zhang Bao flickered like a flame, jumping and bending, trying to catch a glimpse of her and the baby without stepping in front of the other man. My son, Zheng Yi said proudly. She handed him the baby. Zheng Yi shook the baby's toes and fingers. When he poked at his nose, the child awoke and began to wail. A strong cry, he said. Definitely a good sign. A nice broad forehead, too. We'll have to take him to the fortune teller, of course, but no doubt he'll say the same thing. He patted her shoulder. We'll reach Canton soon enough. My relatives will take over from there. You just focus on regaining your strength so we can set out again as soon as possible. She would be lying if she pretended she didn't feel relieved. Zheng Yi had wanted a son. All men did, where she had wanted something to bind the two of them together. Not that bearing his son guaranteed her safety in any way, but it was better than relying on her appearance and wits to keep him from throwing her overboard the instant he grew tired of her. She wouldn't even care much if he ended up marrying another woman and demoted her to second wife. She thought only as far as bringing the child into the world. Of course, she was relieved to hear that he didn't expect her to actually raise it. They docked in Canton the following day. She disembarked more carefully than she usually did, clutching the baby close to her chest like a shield. At the Zhang estate, the women circled her and the child tightly, smelling overwhelmingly of the crushed jasmine and agarwood that dangled from their persons in jeweled filigree pouches, before the wet nurse finally came to take the child away. Then a servant came to guide her to the room where she would spend the next month recuperating. The Zhang women were emphatic that Shi Young abide by the tradition of sitting out the month. That meant no going outside, no bathing, and no partaking of cold foods or drinks for the entire period. It also meant bundling up in layers and layers of clothing despite the warm weather. Shi Young couldn't decide if she liked the tradition. A few days in, she was already feeling restless. The one time she even wandered near a door, and Auntie scolded her so viciously she all but scampered back to her room, apologizing the whole way. Imagine her, the woman who co-commanded the largest and most fearsome fleet in the South China Sea, being cowed by a wobbly old lady. At the same time, there was ease in this kind of a life. For every meal, servants delivered to her pungent, nourishing broths of green papaya and fish head, fist-sized tangles of noodles prepared with pig's kidney and blood cake, the creaminess of the former set off by the metallic tang of the latter. And to top everything off, ginger and jujube tea, the sweet fruit boiled for so long that she could make the petals of flesh blossom in her mouth by just wriggling her tongue into the center. She needed only to sniffle before someone dashed into her room to ask if she required anything, and this power she abused a little more than she knew she ought to. Shi Young began to see why so many of the Zhang women had chosen their silk-collared lives of leisure, despite the other opportunities afforded them by the family business. The fortune teller the family hired, a man with a scraggly gray beard, was supposedly known far and wide for his accurate predictions. Zhang Yi's father had consulted him before several important battles and then gone on to win every single one. What about the one he eventually lost, the one that cost him his life? Well, this fortune teller hadn't been available then. If he had, then Zhang Yi's father surely would have lived, or at least that was the consensus among the family members. He called himself Master Tian, an unlikely surname. His real surname might have been something similar, perhaps the word for patty, changed to the word for sky so that people would have to, in effect, call him Sky Master, which admittedly sounded a lot more impressive than Patty Master. She sat with the baby in her lap. Zhang Yi stood by her side. The Sky Master leaned very close. The baby started to cry, possibly reacting to his sour breath. This child has a smooth, broad forehead, which means he will have a life filled with good fortune. His long earlobes tell me his good fortune will continue into his old age. Zhang Yi gave her a look that said, "See?" She rolled her eyes. He laughed. "Now look at these cheeks," the Sky Master continued. "You see how nice and plump they are? He will go on to have many children of his own, including sons." He turned to Zhang Yi. "Your bloodline is secure, no question about it." Zhang Yi seemed pleased to hear this. For her part, Xiang was beginning to wonder about the Sky Master's credibility. It wasn't that she didn't believe in fortune-telling, but she'd also spent enough time crooning to men what they wanted to hear to know when she was in the presence of someone with a similar vocation. "See this birthmark? The dark color is inauspicious, and its location near the heart suggests he will have heart problems when he is old. He will have to be careful." Everyone has heart problems, Xiang thought, if they're lucky enough to grow old. But here, this is very good. The mole on the right shoulder means he will be very brave, a consummate warrior. Whatever challenges come his way, he will triumph over them. The Sky Master made a few more predictions, but Xiang stopped paying attention. Only as the Sky Master ready to leave did she speak again. "Thank you for your time and wisdom," she said. "We simply could not have guessed any of this." Zhang Yi showed the man out. A little later, he returned and sat down next to her. "Master Tian is a true sage," Zhang Yi said. "I was thinking about our son's name. Given that he's destined to be brave, shouldn't his name reflect that? What do you think about Ying?" "That's fine." "He should have another name, though. Zhang Ying. Zhang Ying what? What do you think?" "Whatever. We can ask your mother if you want." He stared at her. For a moment, she worried she'd acted too indifferently and betrayed the real reason she'd had this child. But Zhang Yi broke into a grin. "Yingxi," he said. "Zhang Yingxi, so he can have a little bit of my name and a little bit of yours." The sentiment was so genuine and touching that she didn't know how to respond. Times like these, she wondered why she ever doubted his feelings for her. Maybe he intended to keep her. Maybe he valued her for exactly who she was. She allowed herself, very briefly, like a child who trapped a firefly between her hands, to peek at a potential future. The two of them, retired but still healthy, surrounded by children and grandchildren. There would be servants to massage her back and oily broths hot enough to scald the tongue. But that was ridiculous. He was going to die in battle, and then she was, or vice versa. And then no one would be left to check if their son indeed grew up to be a brave warrior or have heart problems. That was how the reputations of people like the Sky Master stayed intact. All she said was this: "Zhang Yingxi." I like that very much. Okay, that's it.
That was wonderful. Thank you. So I'm thinking Patty Master, Sky Master. Patty Master, Sky Master. I love it. That was very funny. And one thing about, we were talking earlier about what's great about Zoom readings. You know, you can travel the world to attend one if you want. One of the drawbacks is you can't hear the laughter of the audience. And I laughed a lot, but I had my mic muted. But thank you, Rita. That was wonderful. Our next reader, Bryce Particelli, earned his PhD in education from Columbia University. His nonfiction is in or forthcoming from Harper's, Guernica, Salmagundi, and Fourth River, among others. And he's working on a narrative nonfiction book focused on educational disinformation communities. Please welcome Bryce Particelli.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And first, I just wanted to thank Nick, Janice, and really everyone else who worked so hard to run and fund this program. It's the fellowships just offered a lot of flexibility I needed to focus on the book. So it means a lot. So I just wanted to say thank you. So it's a narrative nonfiction book focused on misinformation or disinformation communities, but I'm really interested in kind of organizations that are developing their own kind of educational ecosystems, particularly ones that are built to sow distrust in scientific consensus and try and really rebuild their own kind of world, right? So that led me to young earthers, flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, and climate change deniers. So I was really interested in like the quirky community individual aspect of it, a little bit more in the storytelling, but my doctorate definitely, focuses on the intersection between education and communication. So there are dips into educational psychology, history, and pedagogy along the way, but a lot of it's a travel story and oddity. So chapter 1 sets up the kind of the issue. It's centered in 2021. There's plenty of misinformation going around in 2020 and today around the pandemic and by our former president and beyond. So the story really runs from 2017 to 2021, really. It also starts to establish that first chapter, some of the intersections of race, class, and technology, some of which you'll see little hints at in this excerpt, but I'm going to start in chapter 2, which brings us back to 2017 to the beginning. Okay, so chapter 2, the Great American Eclipse. History is filled with solar eclipse stories. One occurred in 1135 after the death of King Henry I, as England plunged into war. This hideous darkness agitated the hearts of men, wrote historian William of Malmesbury at the time. Another is chronicled in the Islamic text Bukhari Sharif following the death of Muhammad's infant son in 632. His followers said the sun disappeared because Allah wept, but their prophet disagreed, saying the sun and moon do not eclipse for the death or birth of someone. The earliest written record was in China in 2134 BCE. Astrologers Ho and Shi got drunk and failed to predict one, the story goes, so the emperor cut off their heads. One of the most famous was in 1919 when Arthur Eddington used an eclipse to provide evidence of a piece of Einstein's theory of general relativity. Einstein had described a more complex understanding of gravity than Newton's, arguing that gravity isn't just objects pulling at each other. Space-time itself actually warps. Everything, even light, bends and curves through space. Eddington wanted to test this by seeing if light bends as it moves past a large object. His research team set up observation stations in Brazil and Principe Island during the eclipse. Their expectation? That light from Hyades would bend towards the sun. If it worked, the stars would seem to be in a different place during the daylight eclipse than at night, when the sun isn't in the way. Hyades would appear closer to the sun. It worked. The stars shifted in the sky. It was a big discovery. Newton's physics had worked well for earthbound engineering, but Einstein stretched our understanding into the stars. More experiments were created, expanded, and replicated as scientists pushed and prodded to add new depth to our understanding and new questions to be answered. It helped us journey into space, and it helped us understand why time slows down near larger mass objects, even running slower at sea level than on a mountaintop by less than a second in a lifetime. And it allowed astronomers to recognize gravitational lensing in 1979, when they saw two versions of the same quasar 8.7 billion light years away. This double vision might have seemed like magic not long ago, the same light repeated twice in the night sky, but now astronomers could offer a far more interesting answer. The light bent through galaxies to reach us, taking multiple paths. Not only could we see light from billions of years ago, we could see two moments of that past all at the same time. During the 2017 solar eclipse, dubbed the Great American Eclipse because its shadow cut a line from Oregon to South Carolina, I was at the Creation Museum, an educational facility that claims that our 14 billion year old universe is, in fact, only 6,023 years old. I wanted to understand how places like this seem so compelling. I'd walk the grounds, chat with people, and arrange a conversation with their educational director, Dr. Georgia Purdom. In 2010, I visited for the first time out of sheer curiosity. It was a road trip oddity with my sister, as if we were simply stopping to see the world's largest potato. We'd made this drive dozens of times as children. Our mom would pack her 4 kids into the minivan every summer and take us to the place that she'd grown up. We loved it. We lived in the suburbs outside of New York City, but we got to spend a few weeks each summer playing with cousins on Kentucky Lake, fishing for rainbows from the dock, hopping off cliffs at the flooded quarry, and reaching for the sun from my grandparents' tire swing. I also recall feeling like my family was a curiosity in this rural part of Kentucky. My mom was the only one of her 6 siblings who'd left the South, and some of the people we came across seemed to treat us as suspicious because of it. There was a constant grumble against an unnamed and condescending elite who they believed portrayed the South unfairly when it came to the Civil War, or used public education to undermine their religion, or used the federal government to ban their beliefs from the public square and disarm them from doing anything about it. The comments were usually offhanded, with simmering anger directed at politicians, academics, or the media, who they believed portrayed an intolerant and ignorant South. I recall one time in the aughts as the debate between whether businesses should be saying Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays raged, and a family member grumbled about it. I was managing educational programs in Chicago at the time, and I told him that I had colleagues who were Jewish, Muslim, and atheist, and that our students came from many religions. It just wouldn't make sense for us to use Merry Christmas, I told him. As I spoke, I realized that his community is evangelical, so it does make sense to him. Their stated role in the world is to convert religious differences to fit theirs, after all. They want homogeneity, it's the goal, and an individual's comfort level is secondary at best. Wanting businesses to say Merry Christmas was as much about using language community carved forward as it was about preserving past tradition. We live in different worlds, he sighed. I spent summers as a carpenter in Kentucky and Georgia during graduate school and began pushing back, asking questions. Most people back down about any one argument. Their frustrations never seemed based solely on a denial of racism or science or history or even government overreach. It was all of that, but none of it. Instead, the anger seemed rooted in a fear that their culture was being dismantled and consumed by a larger one. It was a belief that white evangelicals were being written into submission and they needed to push back on every level to stop it. And perhaps if they could push back enough, they could reverse it. The sky is a grayish blue, but it doesn't look like the moon is anywhere near the sun. I'm on the back patio of the Creation Museum, and it's a few minutes before the height of the eclipse, but the frogs are still singing. The wind rustles the cattails below as if nothing is happening. There's no silence or stillness. It's barely any darker, to be honest, so it's easy to see how Ho and she might have missed a partial eclipse if they'd been tipping a few. There are perhaps 200 people on the patio and by the lagoon below, and the crowd is growing. On the steps, a mother and her 2 daughters lay in the middle of the path with their glasses on, elbows down and eyes to the sky. Other families stand in small clusters, passing glasses back and forth. I flew in from New York for this, but I knew we'd only get 92% eclipse. Other areas like Western Kentucky are in the path of totality. I could have just as easily gone there, but I wanted to be here in this place during the most talked about natural event of the year. While the sky is barely blue-gray, when I put on the eclipse glasses, the world transforms. The sky becomes a backlit geometry project, a kid's shoebox assignment. Fuzzy shapes are made blunt by tinted glasses. It's striking. A black sphere sits in front of an orange one on a deep gray backdrop. It's beautiful in its simplicity. Our moon, 220,000 miles away, passing in front of our star, 93 million miles away. It's a simple action on a grand scale, a toddler jumping in front of a camera, made all the more real because the sun gives us light and life, and it is disappearing in the middle of a clear summer day. Built in 2008 with $27 million, a significant amount of money in the rolling hills of North of Northern Kentucky. The Creation Museum receives about 300,000 visitors each year. With a petting zoo, ropes course, extensive gardens, and 75,000 square feet of impressive stone and glass structures, it bears a strong resemblance to any large natural history museum. Past an armed guard and a brontosaurus statue, the glass door is open to a grand hall with a 30-foot Chinese paper dragon hanging above. Above the wall, there's a life-size animatronic display of a child playing next to two velociraptors, as well as display cases that hold imitation scrolls and swords of famous dragon myths. Next to those displays is the guiding question, were dinosaurs dragons? The overwhelming answer is yes. It'll cost you $30 to get any further and $5 to leave, paid to a talkative parking lot attendant. These young Earth creationists, as they describe themselves, argue for a version of Earth that fits a literal interpretation of biblical creation stories. Their central source is the timeline written in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, called the Torah or Torah in Judaism and Islam, using different versions and translations. It's a timeline that was first detailed in the 17th century by Ireland's Archbishop James Ussher, who deduced that the Earth was created on exactly October 23rd, 4004 BCE, and a global flood killed almost everything in 2348 BCE, leaving only 2 of each kind of animal on a boat with 8 people, including 600-year-old Noah. Using that timeline as an infallible starting point, the Creation Museum crams in some selected pieces of science. The supercontinent of Pangaea existed, sure, but it broke into our 7 continents during the 1-year flood rather than over 200 million years. And when Noah's ship landed on a mountain in the Middle East in 2348 BCE, they argue, the animals repopulated the earth by hopping onto rafts of fallen trees. A pair of kangaroos floated to Australia, the tigers to India, ocelots to Mexico, and dragons to Denmark. Science isn't denied here, not exactly, but it is dramatically manipulated, even putting poetry to work. Along the walls, exhibits explain that 1,000-year-old children's stories like Beowulf and St. George and the Dragon are proof that giants and dinosaurs roamed the earth in recent history. And because unicorns are mentioned in the King James Bible, they exist here too, even though unicorn is just a creative translation of the Hebrew word re'em, a wild ox. It's a history that draws from our shared imaginations, the Flintstones, Godzilla, BFG, Jurassic Park, My Little Pony. In fact, it's one of the children's books they published depicts Noah battling a T-Rex in a Roman-styled Colosseum, standing heroically to face the beast as if on a movie poster. It's a fascinating bit of acrobatics that forces you to recall childhood lessons. Okay, I think I'll stop there.
Thanks, Bryce. Fascinating. Okay, our third reader is Osana Simonian. She's an Armenian-Australian novelist, essayist, and short story writer whose work focuses on gender, sexuality, immigration, and identity. Since moving from Sydney to the US, she's completed an English PhD at Texas Tech and published work in the Iowa Review, Michigan Quarterly, Shenandoah, Chicago Tribune, and Best Australian Stories. She's also kind of a homegirl because she is a professor at Cal State San Bernardino. Welcome, Kate Simonian.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Nick, and thanks to all of the folks at the Martha Heasley Cox Center for Steinbeck Studies for giving us all, the gift of time, free time to work on our stuff. Thank you also to Janice for all her hard work for the center. Congratulations to the new cohort, and thank you all for, setting aside an hour of your time to listen to some words. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from the novel that I'm working on. It's now, the novel is now called The Dark Palace. The book follows a sort of self-destructive young Australian woman who is living in the US and is a professor who returns it like that. Like I swear it's not based on my life, who returns home to Australia. And when her sister actually develops stigmata, Tracy, who's the main character, decides that she has to stay and kind of help her sister with her sort of crisis. So this excerpt, the book also, has like a historical fiction aspect, like it deals with the Armenian genocide, and it also has time travel in there, so it gets pretty wild. This excerpt is an extended flashback in which we see Tracy as a high school senior when she's cast in a school musical, and we can see some of her kind of nascent egomaniacal tendencies. Okay, this is chapter 7. In the beginning, the Kiss lived in the vast acreage of Pellwood's private school for girls. It was the waterlogged soil under the Shakespeare garden. It was the lone picnic area picked clean by the maintenance staff. It was the clay shelf on which rested the $12 million indoor swimming pool. The Kiss felt the vibrations of the chapel organ piping over the tennis courts, and it longed to be free. The Kiss first surfaced in the mind of Miss Weber, director of Pellwood's production of 42nd Street. 42nd Street followed Depression-era producer Julian Marsh as he staged a musical called Pretty Lady. Wannabe actress Peggy won a spot in the chorus line. At the 11th hour, the star of Pretty Lady, Dorothea, was injured. Peggy took her place, saving the show within a show. It was a feel-good production, and Miss Weaver was confident in her choice. The next step was casting. She'd usually contact Campbell's Catholic School for Boys, but she hesitated. Boys were a bother, being liable to get sexual, or at least put sex in the air, get the girls all whipped up without knowing why. Like Cinder, the first time she went into heat and twerked against the curtains, then raised her unclaimed haunches to the air and gave a befuddled meow like, what am I even doing? No, Miss Weber was sick of the girls using art as an excuse for self-expression. Last year, the second daughter in Fiddler on the Roof had been found kissing Tevye in the keyboard room, which was a bit too Old Testament for anybody's liking. What Miss Weber really wanted was an all-female cast, but she had to consider the Kiss. Before the opening of Pretty Lady, Julian visited Peggy and, ostensibly to improve her performance, made out with her. That would have been fine if Julian was played by a boy, but two girls kissing? This was a church school after all. Miss Weber asked her cat what she should do. Cinder gave her a slat-eyed look and went back to sleep. Of course, Miss Weber thought, I'll ignore the kiss. She crossed it out on page 81 and replaced it with a platonic shoulder pat. Problem solved. The kiss was overdetermined from the start. Spare it a moment of sympathy. It could not even shrug its slobbery shoulders, for its body was figurative. At the first audition, Miss Weber announced her decision to make the cast entirely female. Then what's the point? Asked one exasperated choir nerd whom no one had suspected of a sexuality. Worst musical ever, Tracy whispered to her best friend ECL, whose name stood for extremely charismatic lesbian. More for me, replied ECL. She spread two fingers over her mouth and undulated her tongue. Girls giggled in horrified delight. Everyone did the cunnilingus sign, but when a lesbian did it, it meant something. Tracy was too nervous to laugh. Tracy Carpetian, half Syrian scholarship student known for such stunts as reading from the Quran in chapel after 9/11, was the most popular girl in the school. This did not guarantee her any breaks, though. For 5 years, she tried out for every musical, and despite her extremely legit acting skills, she'd been turned down as too unfeminine for any role. Read too swarthy. Within the rarefied atmosphere of Sydney private schools, Reed, blindingly white, Tracy was ethnic. To cast her as an important character in any play set before like the year 2000 would not be realistic. When the audition started, Tracy was assigned the part of Julian. This irked her because she'd already memorized Dorothea, a part that was instead allocated to Tracy's milk-colored rich girl nemesis. Still, just because you read for a part didn't mean you were cast as them. Tracy played Julian with such hammy brilliance that Miss Weber wouldn't dare deny her the part of Dorothea that she deserved. The cast list went up. Now, when ECL, whose name was Anna, was cast as the ingenue Peggy, for she could tap dance, a lesbian who dances, and Tracy was cast as Julian, what Tracy thought was, oh, she'd finally been cast as lead male. it made sense in a way. Tracy was intellectually ferocious, sexually invisible due to a dearth of mammary, and in possession of unfairly tenacious facial hair that took hours of tweezering to remove. She was more competitive than her brothers, which her father approved of. Encouraging aggression was how he expressed love. But acknowledging her sad androgyny in front of everyone might erode the cult of personality Tracy worked so hard to maintain. The rest of the school was excited by the cast. Tracy's nemesis was a lead as usual, Dorothea, but here was added celebrity. ECL was the only out lesbian in the school and charismatic, extremely. And Tracy was whom the student body would have voted head girl had not the teachers' committee vetoed her as, their words, a dangerous element. In hindsight, the sheer magnitude of this celebrity collision might have been cause for concern, but recall that at this point, the kiss was nascent. It could only be sensed while walking barefoot through the school grounds on a summer night. No, it just seemed like something grand was about to happen, like a killer musical starring the two most notorious girls in the graduating year at Pellwood. Miss Weber had forgotten to redact the kiss before copying scripts for the main cast, so she'd had to take a dry erase marker and manually black it out on page 81 of every script. She'd drawn an arrow out of each oblong and written, Julian pats Peggy on shoulder. It was ECL who noticed the erasure the night before the first rehearsal. She was sitting on her ironic Star Wars bedspread looking at a tasteful BDSM photo book her mother had bought for her. ECL had an irritatingly accepting mother who treated her like a teenage boy and often opined, given the slim pickings amongst single 50-year-old men, that she wished she was gay too. Still, mother was all right. She'd bankrolled ECL's fake so that she could go to gay clubs. ECL didn't have many friends apart from Tracy though, so the idea was mainly used to buy booze for whichever Pellwood girls asked. ECL was considering masturbating, although her deadbolt wasn't drawn, when beneath the dry erase rectangle on page 81, she spotted a glint. 2 words, scintillating. They kiss. The words spoke to a wish that ECL already had to kiss Tracy, regardless of it being a lesbian trope to have a crush on one's straight best friend. Just because it was a cliche doesn't mean it wasn't true. Wasn't that a musical? A throbbing cliche that embarrassingly moved you? And Tracy was not a trope. She could not be contained, summarized, silenced with a marker's tip. She was beguiling and brilliant, like a talking snake that, through its belly, sensed the vibrations of your soul. She'd do something remarkable and then call you the special one, like she had the day ECL came out and Tracy christened her the super hot and charismatic Leslie Anadocious, aka the extremely charismatic lesbian, aka ECL. ECL traced her crush on Tracy farther back than that though, back to the first day of drama class in grade 7, when Tracy had sat next to her with a full tub of sherbet and asked, "Want to share?" ECL had never felt so chosen. ECL knew that the way to her best friend's heart was through scandal. The mere suggestion of it had prompted Tracy to ask ECL to their year 10 formal in protest of the implied stipulation that girls would bring partners of the opposite sex. Despite posing together in some raunchy photos and sharing an obligatory dance, it had been a chaste date, even though Tracy had got drunk at the after party, vomited, and laid her head in ECL's suited lap for a few wonderful minutes. Perhaps the kiss would awaken in Tracy a latent desire, thought ECL. Perhaps the glory of savaging the cherished musical would commingle in Tracy's mind with ECL, sanctifying them as a couple made inviolable through transgression. An onstage kiss. That was next level salacious. A trembling peach bottom there was no way Tracy could resist. Why does ECL's nickname matter? Or that everyone used it, from the girls to the office staff to the softball coaches? Because at Pellwood, Anna's identity was subsumed into that of the extremely charismatic lesbian, or maybe just the lesbian. She was the subject of scandal, and in some quarters, subtle pride. Yes, lesbians, legit a thing now, and we got one. The headmistress bragged to her more enlightened friends of ECL's existence. The headmistress had to be careful, though. A girls' school was always on the verge of becoming a hotbed of lesbian sex, at least in the minds of parents. Also, Jesus. Also, left-wing teachers and a student body down to party. But let's draw the line with celebration, not experimentation. They didn't want a sapphic plague, some sexy collective hysteria, girls being so susceptible to fads. And the borders. What would it mean to have charismatic lesbian boarders, seducing good country girls who just wanted to sleep unmolested at nights and slowly virginally grow into entertaining companions for the land-holding husbands they would one day snag? Pellwood was not about that kind of sentimental education. I think I'll stop there so we have some time for questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. That was wonderful. We have time for questions. So who would like to kick off the question and answer session? Feel free to just unmute yourself and speak.
I can go because I have to run at some point. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So awesome readings from everybody. I really enjoyed all of that. My name is Sahara. I'm an MFA student, by the way. But my question is for Rita. I dropped it in the chat earlier too, but I'd love to know, especially since you're kind of writing this sort of historical fiction novel, how did you go about researching the novel itself and then crafting this historical figure into a character who translated onto the page?
Yeah, there was a book that came out a number of years back called Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. I don't know if people are familiar with it or if people have read it, but basically it was written from all actual historical texts. So the person who wrote it didn't include any details in the novel that, you know, wasn't actually printed in the press or wasn't, in police records or something like that. And I didn't go that far for this novel, but I did do a lot of research. I read a lot of history dissertations. So people who wrote their dissertations on Qing Dynasty China and also on the problem of piracy. So for those of you who don't know this, piracy reached its peak in South China in the early 1800s. So I read a lot of historical, a lot of nonfiction books. And then what I did was I basically plotted out this character's life based on the things that we actually knew about her, and then tried to figure out where the holes were, right? Like, because history is told like this happened and then this happened and there was this battle and then there was this battle. But obviously there's a lot of intimate personal things that happen between, between all of these major battles and sort of larger events. And so I started from the actual big historical events, and then I kind of asked the question of what could have led from point A to point B, what personal things, what, relationship things might have led from this point to this point. And then I kind of wrote the novel that way. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah.
That's really enlightening, actually, in thinking about how to work with sort of characters, especially in history, who there isn't a lot about. Like, I really like that idea. Thank you so much. It's a great answer.
Well, that actually brings me to a question that I have about a similar topic, which is, do you think it's better when you're writing historical fiction to find a subject about whom little is known, or who has holes in their record? Space for fiction. I think about this a lot. What do you think, Rita?
I think for me, it's both, right? I'm going to sound like such a therapist here. Like it can be, both things can be true at the same time. Where, on one hand, I think having certain major points that are well documented in history, it provides, for me at least, it provides good external structure so that you don't feel like you have to like invent this whole plot from scratch, right? Like you have the skeleton that you can, flesh out, basically, that you can kind of fill in with, organs and whatnot. And but at the same time, I think it was a very deliberate choice, because she was a woman, and not much, you know what I mean? Like the major male figures of her day, they got written about thoroughly. There are kind of entire historical accounts of their lives and how they got where they ended up. And the very fact, so her one account says her birth name is Xiang, but in popular culture, she's referred to as Qing Shi or Qing Yi Sao. And literally what that means is the wife of Qing. So she doesn't even get a name in many historical accounts. She's referred to as the wife of the pirate commander. And so I thought it would be better to choose someone who had a presence, but because of sexism and other reasons, nobody ever wrote a full biography of her life, and so that allowed me to kind of really play with the details.
Well, I think the novel's going to be huge. I really do. I think the appetite for that story is out there, and I think the timing is perfect. And I can't wait to read it. I see people in the chat agree with me. Kate, I have a question for you. How do you know when you're writing which jokes are going to hit? Like, have you tried out this material? Because I felt like I was watching a stand-up, and stand-ups, they rehearse their material. They try out the material in front of very small groups to see what hits, what works, and then work it into but in this case, I'm wondering, what sort of vetting has this material had, or did it just come out this way?
I feel like I don't know that any of it lands. So I just hope that I'm not too offensive, and I'm walking that line between, disgusting people and, entertaining them. So I actually read my work out a lot, aloud to myself. And I'm quite, here I think I'm aided by my natural obsessiveness and perfectionism. So I just kind of go over it and over it and over it and over it. This piece, this excerpt is one of the more, I find it one of them, it's a fun part of a book. It's about genocide. So that's kind of why I read it. But that means I've also, it's been polished up a bit, so it's going to be published in the Iowa Review in a few months. So this is I've worked on it a little bit. So yeah, to answer your question.
Oh, it landed. People saying in the chat, it landed. This is the problem, you don't know when you're reading on Zoom, but man, I was laughing a lot. And I was looking at people's faces too in gallery view.
I couldn't see anyone's faces, so
yeah,
I'm
right.
glad.
I know. Does anyone have a question for Bryce?
I find one. I have one, if that's okay. I think for me, very often when I think about, these flat earthers and, 9/11 deniers, sort of all of these people who participate in these, who have an active part in perpetuating these conspiracies, I tend to react with a lot of impatience and frustration. And I'm wondering for you, Bryce, what is, because the impression that I got while listening to you read was that you had a good bit of empathy for these people that you were writing about, that you didn't agree with them, but that you still felt deeply empathetic toward them. And I'm just wondering kind of what is it like for you emotionally to, if I might opine for a second, to write about a group of people that I think have done a lot of damage to society, and yet okay, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's really difficult, honestly. It's a really difficult thing to balance, right? Because there is a lot of damage that happens through this type of thinking, and making sure that story is inside of this is essential, while also not dehumanizing the people for believing that and going in that direction. And I guess part of what I'm interested in is trying to figure out the why, right? So if I put them into that kind of destructive category immediately and I don't try and understand them, then I won't ever be able to understand what's going on and how it happens and how we can combat it. You know, it's I hold back a lot, really, is the answer, right? I hold back so that I can talk about it later. But that balance is actually a really difficult one, right? You don't want to leave too much room so that dangerous ideas catch hold. But you know, the reality also is that there's a lot of research around conspiratorial thinking, and it tends, you know, more than half of us, more than half of Americans, these are all studies in the US that I was looking at, because this is all set in the US. More than half of us believe regularly and, you know, consistently endorse some kind of a conspiratorial narrative. You know, it tends to happen when we're unable to gain a sense of control of objectivity and we try and gain it perceptually, right? So we actually distort objective reality when we can't understand it. So, you know, so there are those things. And then we're also, you know, part of that chapter focuses on those educational ecosystems that get built, and they are built on every level, right? So I was in a museum, it's one of dozens of museums. There are dozens of universities that also back up this exact thing. There are quote unquote peer-reviewed academic journals that also back up those things, you know, this ideology. And you can find that for a lot of these ideologies, right? That you can find yourself in a bubble and not get out of it. It's hard to see out of it because it's grown so large, which is where technology comes in too, right? So I guess that's where the compassion comes from, you know, like trying to figure out the why and humanize people so that it makes a little bit more sense, you know?
Reminds me a lot of what Steinbeck did in Travels with Charlie. I recently reread that because I wrote something about it, and it was in 1960, but it could have been today. It felt very American, 61 years ago. It was, you know, and he took that same approach that you're talking about, holding back. And he tells us later that he held back in some interviews with people. So it's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for reading, for sharing your work, and for answering questions. I want to encourage everyone to tell your friends if they missed this event. We recorded it, and we're going to put it on link to the Steinbeck Center's homepage and on our YouTube channel. And you can also see the one from the fall there. And please check this space in the fall, where we'll have 3 more readers, and enjoy your experience in a few years, everyone in the audience, when you can say, I heard them when they were nobody. I heard them. And now look at this book. It's in the New York Times or whatever. So thank you all for coming, and good night.